So, have you in your life had the experience of avoiding your grief?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this in our personal stories. I closeted my grief when my grandma died. I was 16. I didn't know anything about emotional processing. I thought, you were supposed to be tough and carry on. And I just kind of divorced myself from a whole bunch of the process. But I definitely experienced emotional withdrawal from people that were important to me. Then when my brother died, all this sort of closeted grief also came out with all these other closeted sweaters that were like, we want to turn too.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Full Time Grievers. Today, we are discussing what happens when you don't grieve. And I want to open us with a story, which is actually a summary of a TV show.
As many stories are these days.
That's true. That's true. So, there's this TV show on Netflix. It's called Human Resources. It's animated, it's definitely adult content. Do not watch it in front of your children. And it is it's almost like internal family resources therapy
Hmm,
externalized into a television show. So there's these
wow.
characters that are humans on Earth, and each character has a team of monsters that support them. So every character has a love bug, a logic rock. Some characters get addiction angels. Some characters get grief sweaters, and so these are all the different characters that someone can have. And so the monsters have the character as the client, and the show actually has the monsters as the main characters and the clients as the secondary characters.
Wow.
It's an amazing show.
Yeah.
The first season is good. The second season is hit or miss, as most shows go. Anyway, so in season 1, episode 9, the episode is titled "It's Almost Over." And it portrays a client who is losing his mother to dementia. And the client has a love bug named Walter and a logic rock named Pete, who are in love with mom and want to do everything to take care of mom and are trying to make sure mom has all of her logistical needs met. And then when it's nearing the end of the mother who's passing away's life, a new monster comes onto the scene, and his name is Keith from Grief. So, Keith from Grief is a knit sweater.
Such a tongue twister, Keith from Grief.
Uh,
That's good. So he's a sweater?
he's a knit sweater,
He's a nice sweater. Okay.
and all he wants to do is wrap up the client in his warm fuzziness. And all the client wants to do, and all the other monsters that support the client wants to do, is run away from Keith from Grief. And this episode, I highly recommend to just, if you don't want to watch the whole series, just go look up episode 9, season 1, and just watch this if you're grieving. It's so beautiful to see a visual metaphor of what happens when you run away from your grief. So there's no time to grieve. We need to take care of mom. Go away, grief. Go away, Keith
Mhm.
from grief. Go away. And then mom wanders off and gets lost because she has dementia. Go away, Keith from grief. We don't have time for you. And the more that the client runs away and avoids Keith from grief, the bigger and bigger and bigger this sweater gets. And it goes from a cute little sweater to a monster as big as a building chasing down the client until he finally catches the client. And then when he finally gets him, the client thinks he's going to die because this monster has just become onto him. But instead of dying, he actually gets wrapped up in this sweater and he has a really long, really good cry. He admits to himself for the first time ever that his mom is actually dying and that this is really sad and this is the end of her life. And he's able to be with the grief sweater.
Oh my goodness. I love it so much. It's like what, media entertainment could be for all of us, if we were building things like that to support us and getting our heads around concepts like this. Oh, it's such a
Hmm.
beautiful and powerful metaphor.
Hmm.
Definitely have to check that out myself. And I love too the way it, like it starts off as this cute little sweater, and the more he runs away from it, the bigger, or the more the client runs away from it, the bigger the sweater gets. Oh, love that. Such a great part of the metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite comical how much this sweater can destroy on its path to attaining the grief. And then once it's attained, it's released.
Oh,
And then it just
yeah.
kind of becomes a companion again.
Which, yeah, I personally really relate to, and even in the times where I've had the experience of my grief being, I don't know, pretty overwhelming, I guess is the way to put it. Like just a lot to be with, maybe more, or way more than I want to be with. I still have always seen it as kind of more on the like something to snuggle up with side than, like you see some people, post like grief is a bitch, or, grief is a, whatever,
Mhm.
like out to get you kind of a thing. And I guess this this episode, or that show makes a good argument for both. Like
Mhm.
how if you ignore it, yeah, it does become scarier and bigger and sneaking up on you and trying to get you at inopportune moments.
Mhm.
Wow, wow, wow. So cool. Well, thanks for starting us off with that.
Mhm.
One of the other things we want to talk about today is kind of just what does this look like if we don't give ourselves the room or the space, or in some cases if life interrupts and we have to get back to work, or we have to get back to taking care of everybody else. If for some reason our grief is interrupted, there are signs that our body will show us, signs that our mind will show us, signs that even our emotional selves will show us that there's something there that we need to attend to.
Mhm.
And like with the sweater, it can get bigger and scarier and harder to work with the more we run from it.
I think that a really common reason I've seen in my clients why they avoid their feelings in general and grief is that they don't have the skill set to process their emotions.
Exactly.
So when they do process their emotions, it is almost exclusively coming from a state of overwhelm. And
Mm-hmm.
that leads to a lot of nervous system dysregulation.
Yeah.
And then they make this correlation in their mind that feeling my feelings leads to nervous system dysregulation. And they're not thinking this consciously, but it might
Right.
feel like a panic attack or like they're going to die, like the world's going to end. And then that leads to a pattern of avoidance of feelings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up with other feelings too, because it is the same. Whatever feelings we're trying, or even subconsciously avoiding, suppressing, holding ourselves away from, will, much like this grief sweater, keep coming after us, or we'll keep driving ourselves subconsciously toward opportunities for those feelings to come up, because our system wants to move them, wants to get them out of us, wants to be able to express them instead of having the interruption and even the survival mode reaction of like get away from me feelings. And like you're saying too, whether it's because of how we got brought up, which it is for many of us, we didn't get enough training in how to do emotion, so we're more likely to go into this more reactive space before we can attend to them, or instead of attending them. But then that habit creates a greater likelihood of going into survival mode instead of even recognizing that we had feelings. Suddenly we're just fighting with someone and we're like, well, like I was fine 5 minutes ago, what's going on? And like you're saying, we can and have culturally really conflated emotion and like what emotion looks like with survival mode reactivity. We have anger. Most of us think of it, or in the examples we've seen of it, are actually fight. And so we have
Mhm.
this like, that means people are going to be, slinging fists, or, anger means people are going to be hurt, or anger means things are going to get broken, when really they're not the same thing at all. They just get
Mhm.
kind of combined, like you're saying, or saved up until it's so reactive.
Mhm.
So yeah, like with many emotions, if we do that with grief, then we start to see it. It starts to show up in other ways. Other emotions, like that's one way, and we'll talk about, coming out kind of sideways, but physical things, mental things, relational things too.
Mhm.
So let's get a little further into it.
Yeah.
Let's start with physical, because that's sometimes the things that people notice first, right? Is, oh, my body's doing something that it doesn't usually do.
I think really almost first sign can be digestive issues and heart issues. I've seen both
Yeah.
happen in my clients and in the loved ones surrounding me, that right after someone dies, they have to go to the hospital to get their heart checked because they're
Yeah.
having strange palpitations, or they get really constipated or have loose stools and can't digest their food properly for the first time ever.
Yeah, yeah. And like we've talked about in previous episodes, some of that is because of the likelihood and, you know, pretty common experience that many of us have of going into some kind of survival mode immediately following the loss. And that
Mhm.
disrupts our digestion, it disrupts our sleep, it disrupts our, normal operations in a lot of ways. And that heart thing, some of it I think is because our heart, for whatever reason, actually takes a toll during emotional distress.
Absolutely.
There's a number of different reasons for that, but there is this really common thing that can happen. It's actually supposedly more common in women than in men, but actual like condition, it's sometimes called broken heart syndrome. It comes up in grief for people after the loss of a partnership too sometimes, and it can mimic actual like heart arrest or heart failure symptoms, and in
Mhm.
some cases actually lead to that. So it can be quite serious, not just like, oh, I'm a little bit, oh, I got a little heart pain, or oh, my digestion's a little off. A prolonged period of this can be really detrimental to the body.
Even a short period, I've
Yeah,
seen it
yeah.
I've seen it happen, even a short period of grief within in the first couple months of grief during the acute phase, when people just have no idea how to process their feelings, and then they are all of a sudden struck with this condition, a condition like this. I've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So digestive issues is one part of it. Increased risk of other illnesses is another kind of big part of that, as our immune system and digestive system and even our heart regulation and our breathing regulation are thrown off by this period of survival reactivity, then it's way easier for us to contract something, a virus or bacteria or anything like that, than it would be normally.
Hmm.
But then it also affects, many of us, and we've already talked about this, many of us experience sleep disturbances, which can compound everything else. If we're not getting enough sleep, then we're not getting enough restoration in the body or in the brain. And so then conditions or, digestive issues or illnesses will even take longer to work through.
And that can also lead to fatigue,
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
it difficult to exercise, making it difficult to get enough sleep. So it all
Exactly.
just kind of
Yes.
spirals in on itself, gets worse and
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah. Yes. And some of us who, and I definitely want to raise my hand, I experienced all of these things. I imagine you have too, in different ways at different times, with certainly the number of episodes of grieving and processes of grieving that you've been through. But the one that really surprised me was the physical aches and pains. And I wasn't even trying to hold it back, but I definitely felt like my body just being more sensitive.
Yeah.
And like, the way I put it is like I'd been doing so well at like tending to my body and my health that I'd sort of held off aging. But in the year or two after my brother passed, I definitely, whoa, some of my aging caught up with me. And like, I've got like, my joints feel differently sometimes still, or, like I actually have this knee thing that came along after my brother died that I didn't have at all before and is still kind of hanging around. So physical aches, pains, inflammation can be a really common thing earlier on, but can also be this signal that shows up for us the longer we suppress our grief if we're doing that.
Yeah.
There's actually really interesting research. Dr. John Sarno kind of started the mind body revolution, if you will, and was the first to look into physical pain associated with emotional suppression, essentially. And there's really like now an interesting body of research confirming that there's this direct link between feelings we don't feel and pain that shows up to help us get some of those feelings out, or that shows up instead because we're not attending to that emotion.
Wow. Yeah, I'm a big believer that fibromyalgia is like pain in the body that hasn't been felt. And so it's coming out through chronic pain conditions. And unprocessed emotions, if left over time, can turn into chronic conditions. A lot of people that I see and that my center sees are dealing with chronic health conditions. And a big part of our work together is helping them figure out the grief that they never grieved or
Mm-hmm.
the emotions that they never processed. And that doesn't have to be grief of a death, it can be grief of a chapter of their life being over, of big transitions that have led to that chronic illness. And sometimes that is early enough along in their journey to actually help them reverse the illness. And other times when it is farther along, it is more of just supporting with symptom management and easing the load and getting that inner emotional healing that they need, that they needed decades previously, getting it now, which creates such a sense of relief and peace in the body, even if the body is still sick.
Yeah. Yes. And two, I've had it be where, supporting a client who discovers some grief, they work through it, they do a bunch of crying. It's almost like they cry out the condition, and I had a
Mm-hmm.
client who had just like years and years and years of just this really clenched shoulder and neck situation that he couldn't figure out, and did all kinds of treatment, but he worked with his grief and it went away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's amazing how the body can reflect what's going on inside us and hold on to something like that for us, until we can attend to it.
Mm-hmm. And how sometimes getting body work can release grief,
Oh yeah,
and we don't even know what the grief is, but
yeah,
we just start crying in during a massage or in a yoga pose, and we can't explain it. But just
hmm,
the letting that happen is another beautiful way to let it go from the body, because we don't always need to be able to logic it or assign words to it. We can just let
no,
it be a
right,
sensation of the body.
absolutely, absolutely, or just some tears that are flowing with no
Hmm.
words or description or anything. Yeah. Okay, so there are other physical effects, but those are kind of the main stars in the constellation of things that can show up in our bodies,
Hmm.
especially if we're not giving ourselves room to let out the grief that comes up when it's right for us. But let's talk some about the mental effects too.
Yeah, so for mental, a lot of mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, rumination, substance abuse, those can all be the mind's act of avoidance and the almost the coping mechanism to avoid.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. And I think some of it too, I mean, I think absolutely what you're saying, like one of the things a nervous system does is look away from something that's scary sometimes just so that it's a
Mhm.
little less scary, right? To kind of titrate our experience of it. And I think there is some of that. But I also think, sort of similar to what we were describing before, if we're not letting out our grief, then we're kind of, it's filling up our capacity, which will
Mhm.
eventually tell our system, hey, there's too much here. I can't, I'm maxing out. And so we're likely to go into some kind of survival reactivity to discharge some of the emotional intensity.
Mhm.
Depression, I think of as actually a sustained period of survival freeze, where we're just like the
Mhm.
lights are just turned down so long, so much that, like we don't want to do anything. We don't want to get off the couch. Life isn't worth lifing. The things that we used to enjoy don't light us up anymore because there's just this like tamping down, you know. And I think similarly with chronic anxiety, I mean, I definitely think of anxiety as an emotion, but when it's chronic, when it's there all the time, when it's like around every corner, I think of it more as a kind of survival reaction too, where we're just super vigilant, kind of in like, we're not sure if we're in fight, we're not sure if we're in flight, but we got to be watching out all the time. And anxiety can be like that too, especially like if it's just like ongoing, ongoing, ongoing everywhere we turn. Same with difficulty in concentrating and rumination, right? They're just like,
Mhm.
our thoughts are everywhere trying to keep us safe.
Mhm. I think that it definitely can be a symptom of unprocessed grief, and I don't want to pigeonhole it and say that that is what it always is. So
100%.
just to be clear,
Yeah. Yes.
that
Yes.
those things can exist on their own or from a different cause or from a different chemical imbalance of the brain. And if it's, it can also very likely be unprocessed feelings and unprocessed grief.
Yeah. I I
Your
love that you put
face
it
right
that way.
now.
Yeah, well, I think about it, there's just like a whole nother 3 or 4 episodes I think that are right in there because you're
Yeah.
right. Like there are other feelings that we could be holding on to besides grief that are in there. There can be trauma that's involved in there that's having us be
Mhm.
more reactive in whatever way, and our system is picking the version that's likely to keep us safer. It can be like just the neural habit of I've got to stay vigilant or I've got to stay a little lower, or like there's all kinds of reasons that it could be. And at the same time, I'm thinking there's probably always a little bit of grief in there. you
Yeah.
know like if we have trauma, definitely there's grief around that, right? If
Mhm.
we're having to stay vigilant all the time for whatever reason, or we just got kind of trained for that, there's probably grief there too. Or like we're seeing our life pass by as we can't get off the couch, and I've been that person. A lot of grief there, like what am I even doing here, kind of grief. So yes, and yes. uh,
Mhm.
I feel such just so much tenderness and empathy for us all navigating life, and really at the bottom line, not being given and not trafficking in the tools that could help us have an easier time, working
Yeah.
through our feelings and not having this kind of buildup.
Mhm.
You mentioned too, like substance issues. I think it runs the gambit with those too, as our nervous system is trying to find neurochemistry that feels better than this grief I'm trying to hold myself away from. Same with other compulsive behaviors too, where or we're trying to, our nervous system is trying to use some behavior to signal safety or to marshal the neurochemistry that helps us feel safer.
A lot of substance abuse is self-medication.
Yeah, exactly.
It's undiagnosed mental illness or diagnosed mental illness that's untreated.
Yeah,
It's a lot of untreated people trying to feel better themselves, and so trying to self-medicate their way through it.
yeah. And I think of that as like just a nervous system or brain like wants the neurochemistry it wants, and so it will
Yeah.
do what it needs to do to secure that, even if it's
Mhm.
not as good for the life of this body.
Yeah. Or the relationships.
Yeah. Further along those lines, in terms of inhibited grief or suppressed grief leading to worse and worse potential or actual outcomes, for many of us early on when we're in more survival reactivity, and or later on if we're continuing to not tend to our grief or not being able to or not being supported to, then we can have thoughts of like, maybe I shouldn't even be here, or maybe this is just the end, or maybe this is just how it's going to be forever, and I don't want that anymore.
Mhm.
So we see some folks, having more thoughts of ending their own life, or
Mhm.
actually, dying by suicide.
This episode is brought to you by the Center for Emotional Education and Sacramento Reiki Center, where we support full-time grievers every day. Many of our clients have tried everything and it still hasn't been enough. After our work together, they gain the tools and skills that they need to navigate their grief on their own. You can get more information at sacramentoreikicenter.com and centerforoemotionaleducation.com.
It is commonly said in the communities of suicide survivors that suicide is contagious. And it's not contagious as though it's a pathogen that you will inhale, but it's rather contagious that it's of the mind. And that the suicide survivor, in the context of that, or just in general, of someone who's grieving and is experiencing those thoughts, has to be really, really mindful to share with people that they know and to get support and to not try to uh, make their way through that journey alone, uh, because it is very, very difficult and will maybe last for a lot more years than necessary if it's attempted to be done alone. But with the right support, it can be managed and help alleviated a lot sooner.
Yeah. Yes. And I I don't know if I should knock on wood or not. I don't have the direct experience, but I can really imagine just from my own experience and the with the survival reactivity that comes up, the kind of thoughts that we can have anyway, just losing our person. I can I can imagine that it must absolutely come with such a heavier lean in that direction when your person died by suicide. Oh, just feel again such compassion for folks navigating this. So those are, we've talked some about physical effects. We've talked some about mental effects of suppressed or inhibited grief. Let's talk some about emotional effects. And there's a broad range here, and we don't have time to name them all, but we're going to again name some of the highlights. One of the main ones that you'll see is just like numbness and emotional detachment, right? Because we're holding back to such a degree that our nervous system is just like, okay, like I guess I won't go there with the feelings. And we turn the emotional dial down so much that all the rest of the feelings get turned down with it.
Hmm. And the numbness so often starts in the mind and then evolves into the body, and then it leads to a lot of feelings of dissociation from the body. And
Yeah.
it can lead to people making some poor choices because they want to feel anything at all.
Even getting to the point of doing some kind of self-harm or something along those lines to just feel something, right? To feel
Hmm.
anything, to and maybe anything but the like strain of holding back the grief too,
Hmm.
or whatever feelings we might be up for us. I think too it can also be a kind of thing where that leads us to a way of living that is to avoid other things that might be upsetting. Like we
Yeah.
just kind of move away from emotionally activating things as much as possible too. And then the more we do that, the more we experience isolation and a greater likelihood of more loneliness. If we're
Yeah.
withdrawing socially and not wanting to bring our feelings to someone else, or not wanting to be activated, or not wanting to, it to come up and sneak out and get us, we draw back from our people, draw back from our support, which can add to the isolation and really increase our experience that we're probably already having of loneliness. And then we have things like difficulty making decisions. Would this happen for you? I mean, this happens anyway, but did you experience it in your grieving process? I know I really did. Just like, I don't know, I don't care. Fuck, ah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And then I think that can just sort of, if we're suppressing the grief or it's inhibited in some way, then that experience can go longer. Of like, and especially if there's emotional detachment coming in, we're feeling less of what our inclination is or what our motivation or our drive is too. So it can be even more challenging to like feel into what the right decision is for us, on top of trying to get past the emotional hurdle of like, these are just like kind of bullshit decisions now. My person's gone.
Yeah,
Also, like other feelings, anger, guilt, longing, really dogging us, coming up more frequently or more virulently.
or even getting trapped in one of them.
Yeah. Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, so the not grieving, but then being hyperfixated in, for example, guilt can really drive someone mad.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if they were able to work through the hardness of the challenges, the emotions of grief, it would be a way through the guilty feelings. I've seen it happen to a dear friend of mine.
There's so many feelings in a grieving process. If we're holding back the grief, then it is going to kind of supercharge some of the other ones.
Mhm.
Even not holding back my grief, I had a huge experience of anger and resentment that I had to kind of work through as well. And I can just imagine, if I wasn't attending to my grief, how much louder that would be.
Yeah.
It kind of gives me chills a little, like, oh, I'm glad I didn't have to do that part.
Mhm.
And I really feel for people who do too. Like that, and we mentioned it earlier. Your grief can come out sideways, and so maybe you're not allowing yourself to cry or allowing yourself to attend to the grief itself, but you're like snapping at your people more. Or you're like going off on coworkers more, or shouting at traffic more, that kind of thing.
But I think that those are all common things to experience when you're kind of in the grieving process. But if this is going on for years and years and years, when you have no good reason to have this attitude, so to speak, and yet you
Mhm.
do and you can't shake it off, that's often a signal that there's unfelt grief to wrap you up in that little sweater.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I appreciate you bringing in that word attitude, because I think it can, the more it goes on, it can actually really affect not just our mood or our current emotional state, but our attitude, our demeanor, even. And,
Hmm.
like it's sort of like the common story in certain Hollywood, films, or, in certain books, of the like crotchety old guy who never grieved. And so he's just mean now. And
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
that's true, because I mean that actually
Mhm.
happens. It's such a, I don't know, poignant archetype.
Yeah, and you can actually go through a lot of losses and healthfully grieve them and still be a healthy person to be around and not
Absolutely.
isolate and still be in connection and still be in community. But it's about the difference of which fork in the road you take is how much you feel your grief.
Yes. 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 And then, kind of along these lines, this other thing can happen for us, especially emotionally, if we're not being able to attend to our grief. It can, and especially if we have the emotional numbness come up, it can really increase the difficulty we may have in finding meaning or finding purpose in our life, because we have this sort of block to feeling what's true for us, but also because we've there's a kind of putting on hold, with if we're not attending to our grief. and there's so much kind of intense meaning and even purpose that can come out of really tending to our grieving process. So if we're not, I can really imagine the opposite happening too.
Hmm.
And and how, if we're losing meaning too, or losing purpose, then that could even more dramatically increase our experience of anxiety or depression in an ongoing way.
So, have you in your life had the experience of avoiding your grief?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this in our personal stories in those episodes, in the episode that was about my personal story. And I definitely, I want to say, I closeted my grief when my grandma died. I was 16. I didn't know anything about emotional processing. I thought, you were supposed to be tough and carry on. And I just kind of divorced myself from a whole bunch of the process. I didn't go to her funeral. I went to the memorial, but I didn't go to her gravesite for many years after she passed. And as I look back now, I mean, I was really young, so it's hard to track any kind of physical stuff, but I definitely experienced emotional withdrawal from people that were important to me, from my mom, who was important to me, from even from my girlfriend at the time, who was very much there trying to be there for me. It definitely went, I think that contributed to some of the numbness that I then carried around for a long time. Yeah, and then as I shared in the episode where we were talking about our stories, what happened for me was then when my brother died, all this sort of closeted grief also came out, and there was
Hmm.
like a bunch of scary monster sweaters, not just the one kind of nicer sweater or whatever. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but the sweater I was more willing to put on came with all these other closeted sweaters that were like, we want to turn too. And that was
I
pretty
love the
intense.
metaphor of a closeted sweater.
Yeah. I could feel it happening as I was saying, closeting the grief. I was like, yeah, my sweaters are in there.
Yeah. I think that's really, really common for when we are in a stage of life where we have the skill set and the semblance of extra capacity to grieve at all.
Mm,
Then, when something happens, all of the previous griefs get grieved all at once, and it kind of creates this monumental mountain of grief to do. And I see that all the time with my clients,
yeah.
all the time,
Yeah.
weekly.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think even with other emotion too, it kind of snowballs in the background until we're able to
Hmm.
attend to it. And then something triggers it. And then, like, the whole history of that we have with that feeling not getting processed tries to jump into this moment and get some processing, get moved, get expressed.
And that really shows that grief is not linear. Grief does not follow the linear timeline that any book or guide says that it will, because it can be shoved away and put away until it's ready to be dealt with. Sometimes there's very good reason for not having the time or capacity to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then when it's ready, it's there for you and it's ready for you. And so if you have taken the time to find this podcast and you've made it this far in this episode, that probably signifies that that it's ready for you and that you're ready for it and that you're now starting to face it and looking for the tools to build it. So I just want to commend that courage for all of the listeners and to also encourage you to keep going down that path.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate you touching on that. And I think that might be, this is a pretty good note for us to end on, because I definitely think too, uh, if you no matter like what griefs you've had in the past, or how you've processed them or not, or how you've maybe been inhibited in that process or held it away from you, it's not too late.
Mm.
And if another thing doesn't come up to bring you attention back to those griefs and give you a chance to, I'll just put it, cry them out too, and you can do your own homework to go back and reclaim some of the griefs that you haven't had a chance to, put on the sweater of, and let it go back to its more normal size.
Yeah, and to hold your past self with so much love and compassion that it's okay that you didn't grieve then, that there was lots of valid reasons why it didn't happen. And now
Yeah.
is that moment, now is that time. And knowing that when we feel it regularly and let it move through us regularly, then the sweater never turns into a monster, but
Yeah.
it stays as just this companion that holds us through the heaviness.
Hey, thanks for listening to Full-Time Grievers. Please like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you find out when we release the next episode. If you have thoughts or questions about what we shared, please leave them in the comments below. And if this episode made you think of someone, we invite you to send it to them. They could probably use it. Also, don't forget to get your free Receiving Support While Grieving guide in the show notes below.